Today we're recording another special episode. We've got a guest with us today. Please welcome our guest for today, Stuart. Please welcome Toby. All the way from Finland, please welcome Artu. From the T-Hood Popcast, we have Moby. From the US, we have a special guest, and that is Vic. Please welcome our guest, Ray, from the US. Please welcome our guest, Joshua, all the way from the US. Please welcome our guest for today, all the way from Canada, Evan. Please welcome our guest for today, Harry.
So, Stuart, can you tell us what is your earliest Bond memory?
Yeah, it's a bit of a strange one. This is, I grew up very much with the Roger Moore films. Used to see them on telly, but the biggest memory that stood out to me is actually Chris Tarrant flogging Kentucky Fried Chicken on a video advert. So I think it must have been about 9 or 10, and my parents had got a copy of License to Kill. I still can't remember how much of the film I actually saw because it's a 15. I think, there's quite a graphic bit in it, so I can't remember if I saw that or not. But what does stick out for me is, you got Chris Tarrant flogging Kentucky Fried Chicken with a prize of Bond experience for the day. So Chris Tarrant with his lovely Pat Sharp Funhouse style hair that he had selling it actually looked a bit more suave than Bond. He was some flogging a t-shirt. I think you could win as another prize as well. They never actually showed what it looked like as Bond for a day. I don't know if it was like, you can imagine if it was like Roger Moore's or Pierce Brosnan's Bond themed, it'd be quite light-hearted and tongue-in-cheek. I don't know if it's like Dalton's On a Path for Revenge is going to be quite hardcore or something, whether you just go into Colombia and chase down some sort of drug lords or something, I don't know. Maybe that's why they never advertised, because the person didn't survive who won it. But there you go, that's my first memory, really, of Bond that really sticks out.
What would you say your favourite Bond film is?
It's a difficult one, and it's one of those ones where I think if you ask me today and then you asked me in 6 months' time, it could change. I think, though, I generally always come back to The Living Daylights. But at the same time, I've got the softest spot ever for Live and Let Die and for Casino Royale film as well. But I think generally I always come back to The Living Daylights. I think it was the first film that I saw in the cinema. The first Bond film or non-animated film I saw in the cinema as a kid. But when I was talking to my dad about this the other day, he thinks that it was A View to a Kill, but if it was, I don't remember it. But yeah, I mean, The Living Daylights is a great Bond, and it's a shame we didn't see more Dalton films.
So you've just talked about your favourite film, so let's look at the polar opposite. What is your worst film?
Yes, well, I have to maybe... I'm trying to keep my answers maybe a bit shorter, but I'm gonna say like I don't. It kind of changes my kind of like my least favorite kind of changes every now and then. Like I would say maybe like Man with the Golden Gun. I think is generally the worst in the series because I think it has a good villain, but I think it's a kind of like badly paced film. I think it's a film that, unlike Casino Royale, feels very uncertain, insecure in itself. I think it has the worst Bond performance, given the crudeness of Roger Moore's acting, or his characterization of the film, and I have a very kind of like hard time accepting the way the female characters are handled in that film. But I'm going to say like a film that I think kind of like screws its own premise the worst, or like it kind of squanders its own potential was Spectre from 2015, and I think it's not like it's the worst film, but I think I think in execution I think it leaves a lot to be desired. It's way too long. It's the tension isn't quite there. It feels very paper thin. It feels very rote, and I think like Craig himself, I kind of feel that like they made some kind of miscalculation in how the director and the actor made some miscalculation how to perform the role in that film, because I think people say that like Craig seemed bored in that film. I don't think he was necessarily bored. I think he was trying to channel this kind of general Sean Connery like coolness, but that kind of translated as him being kind of like distant and kind of tired. And also he had like a traumatic knee injury, so that might have done something with that. But I think the main problem with Spectre, why it doesn't really work, is that unlike with No Time to Die, where like Bond dying was like a risk decision, but that didn't fundamental level didn't bother me. I think Spectre is a film that, like, in its own plot and story, is fundamentally kind of wrong, which is the idea of like making Blofeld Bond's brother is a it was a deep miscalculation. First of all, it's essentially lifted from a James Bond parody of Austin Powers 3, but the bigger problem is that it doesn't track the actions of the character in the present do not feel tangibly connected to anything in the past, because the characters themselves do not really communicate with it, because the Bond and Blofeld themselves don't seem to have any special relationship. It's just said that they have. And also, by doing this and claiming that somehow every single film before the Spectre was kind of like this big plan made by Blofeld to torture Bond, first of all, it doesn't make any sense. And the second of all, it places Bond himself into the center of this universe. Things are happening to him because of who he is. And that's not interesting.
But let's switch gears slightly and let's talk about Bond himself, as in the actors who played Bond. Do you have a particular favourite that played the role?
I do, and again, this may be my rose-colored glasses, as I called it before, with how I was introduced to the series. My favorite is Pierce Brosnan. If you were to ask me to try to nail down why, I think he had the best balance of class, humor, yet he was still dangerous, yet he still looked that traditional Bond, tall, dark, handsome. I just think he was almost a man after my own heart. And before anybody laughs and goes, well, you're a podcaster, you're nothing like James Bond, what I try to be in my life is well balanced. I don't actually try to be excellent in any certain area. I always try to spend time to be well-rounded, and I felt Pierce Brosnan was that. Now, if you were to ask me who do I think is the best James Bond, that's a different question. I think even though he only did 2 films, Timothy Dalton was the best James Bond. Full disclosure, I have not read the Fleming novels. However, I have looked into them. I've read excerpts. I've watched a lot of, for example, YouTube documentaries on what they were. There is an original illustration of what James Bond is supposed to look like from the 1960s, and Tim Dalton just nails that. And I know doesn't come off as the most charismatic Bond at all. In fact, he's quite crass and intense, but I think he's the closest to the Fleming Bond that has ever been filmed, even more so than Craig.
We in our main pod we talk about different things like the theme songs. Did you have a particular favorite theme song?
Yeah, so even though it's from what I think is my least favorite Bond film, I think it's the best song, Diamonds Are Forever. I think part of it also might be that Kanye sampled it too and made it his own on his second album. But I think thematically it's really good. And also recently in the Sound of 007 documentary, right? I think they spoke about Diamonds Are Forever a fair amount, and that just kind of really increased my appreciation for that song even more so. It's just a classic, I think. I know a lot of folks like Goldfinger as their favorite song too, but I think Goldfinger, I mean, he's singing about the villain, and it's like, whatever. But Diamonds Are Forever, it feels a little romantic, and it just feels perfect.
Definitely a classic for sure. But we can't talk James Bond without talking Bond girls. Now, there's been many over the years, but do you have a particular favourite?
Yeah, I picked Eva Green, who plays Vesper Lynn out of Casino Royale, the first Daniel Craig movie. I thought she was one of the first times where somebody is standing toe-to-toe with Bond in the back-and-forth conversation. I think people might point to Octopussy there maybe as another time, but the whole train scene between Craig and her and just kind of the back and forth, they're just trying to figure out each other and what they're each about, and you know, that she's not just there to be kind of the quote unquote bank, you know, and she's not going to like let him run reckless and do whatever he wants. She doesn't give him more money to buy back in, and the CIA has to do it. I thought she was just really good. I thought she was kind of a unknown actor too, but I mean, they kind of mostly cast unknown actors in that film, and I think they did that on purpose. They didn't want anybody to be have to carry the film. They want to kind of focus everything on Craig, for the next 4 or 5 films that they were going to do, which I think was a smart thing to do, casting choices. But I thought she was great, and she's done some stuff, since then. I think she was in some sort of like fantasy movie. I think that she kind of played the villain. I think it was like wasn't it like the Angelina Jolie like take on like Snow White or something like that? I think maybe she was in. But she doesn't. I mean, I'm sure she's done other stuff too since then. But it would have been cool if they were able to, roll her over into the second film. But obviously, they had their reasons and forcing kind of the script to go the way it did and developing Craig's character and everything. But I thought she was great. I thought she really embodied the character, and like I said, she just kind of held her own on the screen with Craig, and that's not something that you normally see with James Bond versus whoever the Bond girl is in the film. Usually it's just, somebody who they cast who just kind of looks the part. I mean, I think they had Denise Richards playing like some sort of scientist. So that was like, it's a little bit of a stretch, but that was, Halle Berry was in one of them. And there was a whole bunch, but you can kind of point to Casino Royale as kind of how they changed that, and they changed it up in how they were casting that role in the films. And she was the first one. I think she did an excellent job when she was in there.
Yeah, while you were just talking there, Ray, I quickly Googled Eva Green, because she's someone that, in the UK, at least, because I believe she's French, she is quite, I would say she's quite famous, but she's not actually been in that many films. The TV role that she's probably most famous for is Penny Dreadful. So I don't know, that's big in America.
Showtime show, yeah. I think it was on for like a couple years, 3-4 seasons maybe, something like that. But it was on like a premium cable network here, so I don't know how many people actually saw it.
Do you have a particular favourite villain? So this could be either the main primary villain or one of the henchmen / henchwoman.
Sure. I really appreciate Raul Silva. I like how they brought, just a really modern take on what a villain could do with, computers, and, also being, pretty close to Bond's equal as, both being from MI6. I think that he's a, very worthy adversary.
So one thing that Jay and I talk about in each of the main pods is our favourite scenes from each of the Bond movies. Are there any memorable scenes from the franchise that stick out in your mind?
The number one, and I think, again, perhaps probably because it's the first one that I had ever seen, and I know it has a lot of iconic status with Bond fans, is the dam jump in the pre-title sequence of GoldenEye. I just, I rewatched GoldenEye recently, and I can only imagine it's, License to Kill, unfortunately, was sort of a bit of a commercial flop in terms of Bond, and 6 years between movies is a long time. So, I mean, I obviously wasn't really present enough to sort of understand the gravity of GoldenEye at the time, but they had to get it right. It had to go well, and it kind of had to be a smash hit in order to ensure that Bond was going to kind of survive into the modern era. And thinking back on all of that context, watching the dam jump is even more impressive. Like, as a way to introduce the Bond, it's just this awesome stunt. It's so iconic with the wall, and yeah, I just love it. I think the other sort of memorable scene that really pops out to me is, and I sort of quickly mentioned it before, but that's Tracy's death at the end of On Her Majesty's Secret Service. I think it's funny understanding the way that they followed it up with Diamonds Are Forever, and sort of the lack of continuity, so to speak. But again, it's very unique, I think, in the sort of Bond filmography, for the fact that movie ends on really sad, tragic note, which is, pretty unfamiliar for Bond. Usually it's, getting the girl and flying away in some amazing contraption. But I think that's why I like it so much, is sort of that departure. And I think it was a movie that sort of signaled that Bond didn't have to be secret agent movie without a lot of gravitas. It was something that could be sort of fairly dramatic and quite highbrow in a way. And I mean, I say that, and there's Blofeld in a neck brace in the car, which is obviously pretty silly, but no, it was really well done. And I think credit as well to Peter Hunt, who's obviously a longtime sort of core member of the crew that was producing the movies, but really, really well done. And I think George Lazenby's sort of his tone and his delivery of that scene is really, really good. It's actually probably the best he is as Bond. So I think the fact that he saved his best for last as an actor, appearing in his first feature film, is really, really well done.
That's definitely two, I pretty much say, iconic scenes, aren't they, Andy? There from the Bond franchise, and listeners, correct me if I'm wrong. I believe the GoldenEye dam jump is definitely one of the pre-title sequences that me and Andy have said is one of the best ones, if not the best, in the franchise so far.
Yeah, I think it's maybe the best debut scene of any Bond film, particularly because it's the first time Brosnan appears, and to make that impact, and to your earlier point, Evan, around the 6-year gap, they've got to get it right. I mean, that's coming out with all guns blazing. If ever there was a scene to say Bond is back, that would be the one.
Thinking about the future of James Bond, and at the time of recording, they haven't announced who the new James Bond is going to be. There's lots of rumours out there. So, if you were the producer, Harry, on the next James Bond, and you had the deciding vote, who would you pick to be the next James Bond actor?
Yeah, and it looks like the rumors are in line with Aaron Taylor-Johnson, and I did actually just see him in Bullet Train, in which he was great. But, I would take that with a grain of salt. I believe Sam Worthington was the favorite before Craig was announced, who's, of course, now famous for the Avatar films, right to the point where Barbara Broccoli was supposedly coming to his dressing room to fix him up before his auditions, that he was just the preference going in. And we all know what happened. Daniel Craig got the part. So that's why I'm sort of taking the Johnson rumors with a grain of salt, because the rumors all seem to be backed by the fact that he is Broccoli's favorite, when I don't think that means a thing. I think she, is more interested in the good of the franchise going forward than it is, what she likes. And that's why I think the franchise is still running today, because she does a superb job administrating it. Who would I like to see? I've always thought Henry Cavill would be perfect. And I believe when we started talking about doing this podcast, I thought Henry Cavill was going to be a bit busy, but that doesn't seem to be the case, because that's, he's no longer going to be Superman. I think he's also out of The Witcher. So having seen Man from U.N.C.L.E., I think that role would be great. That would be his layer cake. What Layer Cake did for Craig was essentially give him the Bond role. So I think if you take a look at Man from U.N.C.L.E., I mean, Cavill can rock a suit. He's very suave, elegant. I think he would do the part really well. I also think, if they decide to go in this direction, then John Boyega would also be a good choice. He did kind of get sidelined in Star Wars, so why not give him another run at a franchise? I think he'd be a great leading man.
A couple of really good choices there, yeah. And listeners out there, if you haven't heard it, Jay and I did a special Next Bond episode where we talked about some of the bookmakers' favourites and a couple of wild cards that we threw in as well. But yeah, at the time we recorded that, I think Henry Cavill may have been Bookie's favourite. And Aaron Taylor-Johnson didn't get a single mention in that episode, because he was on no one's list. Nobody was talking about him, and then all of a sudden he's just appeared out of nowhere, and the rumour mill has taken effect. So interesting that he's there. But Henry Cavill, John Boyega, two very, very good choices in my opinion.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. Just in case you haven't listened to the special episode about James Bond, from memory, Andy, my memory's going all the time here, but from memory, we both picked Richard Madden, didn't we, from memory? What's your thoughts about Richard Madden, Harry?
Yeah, I love Game of Thrones. I think he would be good. I haven't seen a lot of his other stuff besides his turn as one of the Starks, excuse me. So I don't quite know a lot about him. He's also in that show on Netflix.
Bodyguard?
Yeah, that's the one, right? That's who I'm thinking of, Ben, in terms of him wearing that sort of elegance in the suit. So yeah, he might be good.
No, in all seriousness, thank you very much for being on the show today. We've really, really enjoyed having you and listening to your opinions, and it's great to get views from other Bond superfans.